That's a different one. I don't know. You know what the hell digs a hole like that? Is that a
Mole.
That would be a mole or maybe a skunk too?
Or it could be a coyote just hunting.
That's a pocket gopher there. We got lots of them here.
We've owned land here for 23 years and built out here 20 years ago. And I've never ever seen a rat here. Do I sound believable? So Norman, you're 60 odd years. How many rats have you seen on this place?
I have never seen a rat out here. Muskrat, but that's a totally different one than we're after, I think. He used to come around all the time, the rat guy.
Silent, swift, but deadly, following the lawless and every hired god.
I've been working in rat control for 49 years. That means that my main function is to make sure there's no rats in Alberta, and then we deal with other pests that are in our act. We don't want a population of rats because of the damage they do and the wrecking of the ecosystem, the threat from disease. And in Alberta, they're actually a parasite of man. They can't live in our environment without our food and our shelter. So they're of no benefit to the environment, so we don't want them to exist. Now, whether it's important to get that last rat is kind of a psychological thing. But at any one point in time, we become rat-free when we get rid of that last rat that was reported. We've had our invasive species council do a little project on it, and they think that we save about $45 million a year in damage to the environment, property damage. And if we compare that with, say, Saskatchewan, they had a $3 million budget in doing rat control, and we were under $500,000. I actually admire the rat. It's a species that has a lot of admirable characteristics. You'd think I would have learned something by now, and I'm always learning, and that's what stymies me is I'll go out to a situation and thought, holy snap, I didn't know that, or why didn't I figure that out before? Rats are really smart. In studies, they'll put a rat in a maze and time him how long it takes him to go from where you set him to a cookie, and so many minutes, and they can put another rat in there, and that rat will communicate with that rat, and he can half his time to that cookie. And they don't know exactly whether that rat tells him where the cookie is, or whether there's an image on his brain that tells that rat which turn to make. They don't know, but they can transmit that to another rat. Yeah, he's ratting out on the cookie. Our location has helped us tremendously in staying rat-free. And we have a geographical advantage, and that is we have mountains to our west, and rats cannot live in the mountains. They have to be transported through the mountains. The rats can't live in the north because it's too cold. Rats in the south aren't a real big threat because there's a lot of mountains, and Montana is really sparsely populated, not a lot of intensive farming, and so the only threat we have is rats coming overland from the east. The rats came in on the ships from overseas, and they couldn't live in Canada without human population. So in Ontario, right along the seaway where the ships come in, they had rats. And those rats moved as the settlers moved to the west. They hit the Saskatchewan border in the 30s from Manitoba, and the Saskatchewan government wasn't very established at that time, and neither was our government. They never hit our border until the 50s. That was 20 years later. Our government was more established. We had a Department of Health, we had a Department of Agriculture, and we were able to set up a program to not let them in. And basically that program was a rat control zone along the Saskatchewan border that we checked every farm for rats. And when we started that program, we had 800 infestations in that rat control zone. Today we have 1 or 2. We hate to not allow people to have pet rats because we realize they're a good animal for a pet. We realize that some guys want to have pets, but we can't lose that enthusiasm of having Albertans report to us when they see a rat. It's just worth too much to us. We're not worried that pet rats are going to infest Alberta. The problem with having a pet rat in Alberta is it gives the impression to our general public that we're not rat-free.
Here at Canadian Mouseman, we provide frozen rodents across Canada, coast to coast. We do anything from African sulphur rats to Norwegian rats to domestic mice. We supply zoos, rehabilitation institutions, private reptile keepers. Right here in this building, we have about 800 to 1,000 rats. So we bring our rats in frozen and they leave frozen because we can't keep any live rats due to the regulations. Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, how's it going?
Not bad, you?
No, not bad.
Good to see you.
Yeah, you as well, you as well.
The biggest demand seems to come from private individuals, actually, who raise reptiles. Boa keepers, sometimes crocodilian keepers. Basically large animals. Anything that's big enough to consume a large rat.
Thanks, man. Just grab the door there.
Rats as a species, I think they're a great animal. I think they're a great pet animal. As a social creature, they're a lot smarter than we give them credit for. And as a interaction with a rat too is pretty fun. They do build relationships with humans, and they have the propensity to. We also know that rats are very smart animals, so I think they're a very, very interesting creature amongst all the other pet animals that we keep, that we can sometimes learn cool things from too. Growing up in Singapore, I've seen rats, in the city, and living in Saskatchewan, just an hour outside of Alberta. I've been to the town dump and I've seen rats there running around, and it's a known fact. But for some odd reason, I just never really come across a live one here.
We have basically two species of rats. We have the black rat, or roof rat. His scientific name is Rattus rattus, and he does better on the coast and we have the Norway rat, and he's the Rattus norvegicus, or the brown rat, and he's a little bigger than the roof rat. His tail is not as long as the roof rat, and he basically comes from the prairies, or comes from the east. Why is the Norway rat called the Norway rat when he comes from China? It was because the Norwegians were sailors. They would sail to China for some tea, pick up the Chinese rat, put them on their ship, not purposely of course, and then when they land in another country selling their tea, they brought some rats. The people that received the rats didn't like that and blamed the Norwegians and called them Norwegian rats.
How did you stack the bales?
Well, we lay every bale on the bottom was laid on its edge, so they weren't on the strings. And then we'd put 4 or 5 out there and then leave a little trench. So I would throw rat poison in. But never ever did I ever see a rat in the end.
So was the poison still there in the spring?
No, it was all
always gone.
But there was always mice and crap like that, but you didn't see them either. They were just
controlled too,
yeah. So, and that's about all. I mean, there was maybe 10, 15,000 bales standing in there. Long row of them. That was it.
A lot of pest control officers that work for, say, the city of Lethbridge might get 4 or 5 calls a year, so it doesn't take much of their time. If you call the 310 RATS line, it'll come to my office. I get that call, I phone that individual up, and I ask them for more details on what they saw. Generally, from what they tell me, I can determine whether it's going to be a rat or not. If they saw it in the mid-afternoon and it was walking down the street or across the road, it's not going to be a rat. Rats are very seclusive, they do not like to be out in the open, and if they're out in the open, they head for cover immediately. I wish we had a rat control vehicle that had a machine gun and a swivel on it, but no, we just have a pest control officer over every jurisdiction in Alberta, and we have that name and that number. I call the guy, we'll send him some bait and some instructions on how we should look after it, and it might take him a week to get that rat, but then we're rat free again.
I am the superintendent of the landfill with the City of Medicine Hat. When I was a agricultural supervisor or ag fieldman, we work very closely with the province of Alberta, specifically the Department of Agriculture, on issues like invasive species control. When we discovered the rats of the landfill, I was the agricultural supervisor for Cypress County. So in a normal year, our pest inspectors would get 1 or 2 phone calls about a rat, and we'd go out and investigate. And generally speaking, it was something other than a rat. But in 2012, we started getting more phone calls than the normal. It was in the 5, 10, 15 phone calls about rats, and when we were doing our investigation, we started actually finding rats. And after a while, when we started putting pins into a map of where all of the locations were that we were finding the rats, we identified that they sort of formed a circle around the City of Medicine Hat landfill. So myself and our pest inspector at the time went out late in the evening when it was dark, rats being more active when it's dark, and we did an inspection of the landfill, and eventually it took us a few nights until the weather was cooperating, and eventually we did find a infestation of rats at the landfill.
They're really hard to control once they get in there. Anytime we have a city that brings in 4 or 5 loads of domestic garbage a day and dumps it, they pack it with the packer and then try and cover it. But there's exposed garbage all the time. Dumps are large areas, and rats have possibility where they can find food almost anywhere there. Because there's so much garbage and stuff blowing around, it's very hard to find them.
We established a plan of having identified where the rats were in the landfill, making note of that, making sure that people were aware of what, clearly marking the bait stations, and then trying to bring down the rat population through poisoning.
When we had them mostly controlled in those 2 or 3 months, we continued our control efforts for 6, 8 months. Even though there was no sign of rats there, we continued putting bait out and continually monitored it, and that got that last rat.
If I had to pick one thing that I admired about the rat, it would have to be their tenacity. They certainly have a will to survive and propagate, and their dedication to trying to get into the province is certainly one to be admired.
We'll see what they got. A few holes on that side. See what we got. Oh, we got a little critter nest here.
Not a rat nest.
Not a rat nest.
A
No.
mouse nest. Another thing we have is Frigid Us Hawks
Yeah.
they're an endangered species, but are very, very common here. It's definitely a hub here, so that could be definitely helping clean out any. They're not keeping up to the gophers without a doubt, but
Well, maybe they're like rats that are a little bigger.
maybe, yeah, more to eat.
We've got rattlesnakes around here. We've got mice. Always got mice around. I don't know why, but they're still here. We got gophers galore. So we've got them all, but I've never ever seen a rat here.